and gentlemen, welcome to this very special show, Chinese Checkers, Weaponizing a Virus. And we are going to discuss about this virus which came out of Wuhan. Did it come out from the wet markets of Wuhan? Or was it synthetically manufactured in a laboratory? Is it a virus or is it a weapon? I have a very distinguished panel with me. Brahma Chalani, India's foremost strategic thinker, is here with us, sir. A very warm welcome. Honor and a privilege to have you, sir. And Professor T. Nalapat, who's a professor in geopolitics, a very renowned name, a very respected figure. Professor Nalapat, sir, a very warm welcome to our show. I'll go with you, Mr. Chalani, first. And my first question to you is, over a period of time, we have seen that a lot of people were initially hesitant of saying that this is a virus created in a lab. And I want to know the reasons before I delve into the reasons, whether it's a virus, whether it's a weapon. That will come later during the course of this program. What I want to ask you is that there were a lot of people who were very hesitant in calling it a weapon. Do you think it was because China has pulled out all the stops in sort of tarnishing the credibility of these people who are actually scientists into saying that they're actually conspiracy theorists? What's your view?
I think the main factor was that Trump and company last year were quick to blame the virus on China, on a specific lab at Wuhan. And they were actually quite right. But the fact that they were so prompt in identifying the Wuhan Institute of Virology as the likely source of the virus led the left in the U.S. to view them as conspiracy theorists. So the fact that Trump was associated with this theory led a large group of people in the U.S. to automatically try and shoot it down. Now that Trump is gone, and China clearly has covered up the origins of this virus, a virus that continues to batter large parts of the world. Now, even the skeptics of last year, the people on the left who were dismissing this theory that this virus escaped from a lab, today are calling for investigation into the Wuhan Institute of Virology, getting to the bottom of how this pandemic arose. So today, the people calling for investigation into the lab leak theory are the very people who last year tried to dismiss it.
Absolutely. Now, Professor Nalapat, on to you, sir. Why did China do this? What would China gain out of creating a virus, sir? You've written about gain of function. You wrote about so many things, and you've been speaking about it vociferously. Now, I want to ask you, what does China gain by all this?
Adding on to what Professor Chalani was saying, that one reason why there were so many quote-unquote allegations of conspiracy theories was that some of the key figures in U.S. healthcare, I'm talking, for example, of Dr. Fauci, Peter Daszak, others, as well as several of the key figures in European healthcare, were actually involved in funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology in precisely the program that is presumed to have been the lab leak. So obviously they were, they certainly were not keen on drawing attention to their own role in ensuring that money from the United States, from Europe, flowed to Wuhan in copious quantities. So you had Peter Daszak, for example, who was one of the people who essentially funneled the money to Wuhan for several years, 2014 to 2019, writing a letter in Lancet, not a paper. A paper has got to be scientifically proved and peer-reviewed, but a mere letter which just passes muster with the editors. And then you had another chap writing another similar letter. There's a guy called Fitzgerald. And 7-8 letters like this came out that, oh my God, those who are talking about the Wuhan lab leak, they're all a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists. And as Professor Chalani very correctly said, the fact that Donald Trump started speaking about it also kind of, basically reinforced their point. So there's a very strong group who are very, very interested in ensuring that the lab leak theory is quietly buried and is not brought back to life in 2021.
No, going back to Professor Chalani, sir, I'm going to throw the same question to you. In a broader sense, what does China gain from all this? Now, there have been a lot of theories going around that China is the only economy which is expanding at this point in time, which is pretty much true. It's not false. There are also people who are saying that this virus seems to be geographically specific, and how it is on social media. Now, I want your view. What does China gain by all this? Let's say it was deliberate, sir. Let's say this virus was created in a lab. Let us say this is not a virus, this is a weaponized virus. So what does China gain from this?
I think first, let's clarify as to what a lab leak really means. Does it mean that China created it as a bioweapon? Or does it mean that the virus escaped from the Wuhan lab accidentally? No group of scientists has claimed that the COVID-19 virus was intentionally created as a bioweapon. However, the lab at the Wuhan Institute of Virology that was working on coronaviruses, that lab and the whole institute are linked with the Chinese military. They have been engaged in secret research on behalf of the Chinese military, as the U.S. government, in a fact sheet published on January 15 this year, has stated. And this particular lab at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, by its own admission, was working on coronaviruses, making them become more infectious and more dangerous for experimental purposes. This is what's called in science as gain of function research. That is enhancing the functions of a virus by re-engineering that virus. A natural virus re-engineered to become more dangerous, more infectious, and more transmissible. So the Wuhan Institute of Virology has acknowledged. They have in fact published papers in international journals about this kind of research at that lab. So there is a growing body of scientific opinion today that has come to believe that the virus's origin in the Wuhan lab through accidental escape or accidental infection of lab employees or lab animals is quite likely. But when you have a repressive regime like the one in Beijing, whose instinct is to suppress any error, any mistake, any blunder on its part, so the natural propensity for the regime is to cover up. And this is what happened. In fact, the cover-up by the regime resulted in a local outbreak becoming a global pandemic. And that global pandemic has caused untold suffering and disrupted economies and disrupted social lives across much of the world. China will not admit that this virus escaped from the Wuhan lab. After all, this virus has killed, as of today, nearly 3.5 million people. So a government like the one in Beijing will not admit that because of its negligence, because of its lax safety standards at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that a deadly virus escaped from there and has wrought havoc across the world.
Now, Professor Nalapad, on to you, sir. You see, whether this virus was deliberately let loose into the system or it escaped, it was an accident, that possibly an inquiry may or may not be able to decide because, like Professor Chalani said, the Chinese have covered up a lot. I'd like to understand from you if I may use the word geospecificity of this virus. And when I say geospecificity, I mean that, you have it in Punjab this side, you don't have it in Punjab that side. Sure, there are coronavirus deaths in Pakistan. Sure, there is coronavirus in Pakistan, right? But the kind of severity with India seems to have been hit, it's in Bengal and it's not in Bangladesh. I'm not hoping that it is, and I'm not saying that some other country should suffer, but somehow it seems, that this virus is able to impact a certain location. Am I right, or am I sounding like a conspiracy theorist?
I would only like to say that you check some of the dots. For example, all the different mutations of the virus that we are seeing, all those mutations have a common genomic root. So it's very plausible that if they have a common root, that they've all been created from the same sequencing. And you must remember that till now, we really don't have too much of the information that is needed to ascertain. For example, even on the Chinese vaccine, clearly not enough data has been presented, and possibly one reason is that the lab is doing a tremendous amount of work for the military as well. Well, the fact is that scientifically, when you look at the different mutations, there is a case for saying that they have a common root. The second point is, of course, the immense soft power blow or advantage. Now, there was a huge outcry from WHO, and if I may say so, from within the United States, from different countries, including in India. How can you call it the China virus? A virus does not have a country. Absolutely right. A virus does not have a country. It has, as has been pointed out, there's no passport to a virus. But the fact is that it very quickly was called COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2-2, and or SARS-2. But look at the viruses that have now come, essentially with the same root as that virus. You have the UK variant, you have the Brazil variant, you have the South Africa variant, you have the India variant. Well, they have all got complicated names attached to them, but the names are so complicated that hardly anybody can even pronounce them, much less remember them. In India now we have 3 variants of what they call the virus that originated here, and more are evolving because viruses evolve. So as a consequence, it's called the India virus almost everywhere. It's called the UK virus. It's called the Brazil virus, even by people in their own government. You've seen, for example, the UK. I mean, you have people in the Boris Johnson government talking about the UK variant, and you have people across the world freely talking about the India variant, South Africa variant, when you don't have anybody talking about the China variant, or even, for example, the US variant. There's a variant in California, for example, that you could easily call it by some other name, California. No, it's not even not even mentioned. So the reality is that definitely this, if any military sees what has happened to the world after this pandemic, and if they go back to their cost accounting data, and they go back to the cost of developing this virus, and they go back to the cost that has been caused as a consequence, and if at the same time they are able to, I'm not saying that they have done that, I'm just saying theoretically, if they're able to perfect a super vaccine that is effective against all strains of the virus, you can imagine that military has a weapon as deadly as the atomic bomb.
So what I wanted to ask you is something slightly different. Now, Professor Nalapat spoke about the Singapore strain, the UK strain, the US strain, the South African strain, and now obviously the Indian strain. Everybody seems to have forgotten that this virus originated in China. Deliberate or accident, it originated in Wuhan, which is in China. So my question to you is, Professor Chelani, is, slightly different now. We've all heard of the 3 warfare strategy of China. I was reading a paper on it, which said that there is psychological warfare, there is media warfare, and there is legal warfare. What kind of machinery do you think has been put into motion where now people are not talking about it as the Chinese virus? Now, Indians are talking about Indian virus. The Singaporeans themselves, though they objected to, a politician from India saying something about it, but now these terms are in common usage. What did China do? What level of information warfare did China do that the entire world is now not talking about it after Trump as the Chinese virus? Now people are just saying Indian variant, South African variant, Singapore variant, US variant. What went on behind the scenes? So what is your analysis?
China's international clout and international power are such that it's able to influence the international narrative and the international debate. And look at the irony of it, that the Chinese government spent so much effort last year to ensure that nobody called it the Chinese virus. And yet when the B1617 variant arose in India, the Chinese state media were the first to start calling it the Indian variant. But there is a bigger question, a bigger mystery that begs for an answer. The mystery is that the COVID-19 virus has ravaged the entire world other than the country of its birth. How is it that China, which gave birth to the pandemic, is essentially unaffected by the COVID-19 virus? China is the least affected country from this pandemic. Its economy has boomed during the pandemic. Its exports have reached an all-time high. And the mystery of how China remains essentially unaffected is a mystery that needs to be examined. There's also another reason why the pandemic's origins are so critical for the world to investigate. This is not the first pandemic that China has given birth to. China was the origin of several major influenza epidemics. As Chinese scientists have acknowledged, China was the origin of the 1957 Asian flu, the 1968 Hong Kong flu, and the 1977 Russian flu. And new research shows that even the 1918 Spanish flu, which killed 50 million people worldwide, including 2 million people in India, that virus also originated in China. Even more important is the fact that the current pandemic is not the first China-originating coronavirus pandemic or the first case involving Chinese concealment of facts and samples. In 2002, a Chinese cover-up of the SARS outbreak triggered the world's first 21st century pandemic. SARS, like COVID, is a viral disease caused by a coronavirus. So getting to the bottom of how the COVID-19 pathogen erupted, how it spread, is essential for designing international rapid response efforts to prevent a future local disease outbreak in China from becoming another pandemic. So there are valid reasons as to why we should get to the bottom of how this pandemic arose in China.
Professor Nalapat, you heard what Professor Chelani just said, sir, and I'm going to ask you my next question, sir. And the next question is, a lot of us know, and the American media has spoken about it, American politicians have spoken about it, and I have friends in the US who often say this, that the highest echelons of American academia have been infiltrated by the Chinese. And conspiracy theory or not, the fact of the matter is that some of it is also funded by the PLA. Some of this research that is happening in America is futuristic, cutting edge, 22nd century sort of research, which will, we'll see the results after decades. What do you think the world and America could do to make sure that, because the Chinese would weaponize or try to weaponize, something else. Today it's a virus, something it could be, tomorrow it could be solar energy. People have been talking about weaponizing of natural elements. Now, my question to you is, sir, what can America do to stop this? Because clearly, at the topmost scientific research echelons of America, they stand compromised. People are coming from China, students are taking admission, they're doing research, they're going back.
I can tell you very, very clearly that there is a race going on between China and the United States, for example, in artificial intelligence. And this is now very clear that China wants to replace the United States. The only thing that can be done is one word: decoupling. You have to decouple critical industries from China. I mean, you can produce your toys there, you can produce your bicycles there, but anything that is to do with technology, you have to decouple. Anything that has to do with strategic items such as public health, agriculture, you have to decouple. And the reality is that you have today almost no decoupling. I mean, you have the Chinese supply chains are functioning in 2020 even more robustly than they functioned in 2019. And the same, as Dr. Chelani correctly said, is applying in 2021. I think, frankly, what we need to do, we need to ensure that we become an alternative supply chain to countries that want to decouple from China. Take, for example, the vaccines or therapeutics. There are several Indian companies that can produce vaccines. And frankly, I'm not happy that just 2 or 3 have been producing it. In the past, other companies produced it, and a certain health minister was there called Ambumani Ramadas, and he ensured that several very good public sector units were taken away from that particular job. Well, public sector, private sector, they need to be brought back so that we produce effective vaccines. Take this black fungus. The point is, unless we come in for therapeutics that can cure black fungus, we are in trouble. So therapeutics and vaccines are what is needed. We have the potential in India. Multiple regulatory and other obstacles have been created to it. I'm not saying any of them has been caused because of Chinese influence or Chinese agents or whatever. I'm only saying that, frankly, the reality that India is producing so few vaccines and that therapeutics, so many therapeutics that are useful in the treatment of COVID-19, they've not even been rigorously tested in India. And at the same time, we are in a rush to import very expensive drugs from abroad. And if I may say so, oxygen concentrators from China, when the core of these concentrators is made in Europe. They don't want to supply to China. They'd love to supply to India. Well, we should take them. And I mean, if an Indian company cannot make a container for the core of the concentrator, Indian company cannot make a bicycle. I can tell you, Indian companies can make a lot more. I'd like to end, Gaurav, by saying, across the world, the people who are doing cutting-edge research in China, in Taiwan, in the United States, in the UK, in Europe, on the technologies that are being used now, even in this battle against the pandemic, including the vaccines, many of them are Indian origin or Indian citizens. Let's use our own citizens better and let's clear the roadblocks so that we can face any effort by any military to flood us with a pandemic the way it has happened in 2020.
Before I conclude the show, sir, last question to you. And I'm going to ask you to come closer to the line of actual control. Now, there have been reports in the media that China, once again, has not been totally honest. When we spoke about disengagement, there are points where China is very slow to disengage. My question to you is, sir, taking cover of this pandemic, taking cover of more than 3.5 lakh deaths, which unfortunately have happened in India, and this coronavirus has ravaged the rest of the world. What do you think is China going to do, sir, maybe next year along the line of actual control? Because we haven't seen the last of China trying to encroach upon our territory. We haven't seen the last of them. They will come back. What do you think is happening?
You are absolutely right that what's happening along the line of actual control is quite ominous. In April, May, when India was preoccupied internally with enforcing the world's strictest lockdown, China took advantage and encroached into the border areas of Ladakh. And today, again, when India is preoccupied with battling the second wave of COVID-19, there are fears that China might seize this opportunity to spring more surprises. That's the reason why the Indian Army chief has twice gone to the Ladakh front lines in recent weeks. But even though the focus now is on strengthening our defenses in Ladakh, China would likely, if it wants to spring a new surprise, it's likely to spring a surprise not in Ladakh but elsewhere. So we need to be on guard all across the line of actual control. But more ominously, by building permanent military infrastructure, creating new facilities and installations along the border with India, China has made its intention very clear. Its intentions are to either cause a war at an opportune time or to exert sustained and intense military pressure on India over the long run. So there are only two possibilities. Either that it believes that a war is inevitable, that it will have to teach India a lesson at an appropriate time, or its strategy is to increase militarization of the Himalayan border, to maintain and to step up sustained pressure on India so that India is not able to focus on the broader China challenge. That is, keep India boxed in and tied down. And India has to take the China military threat very seriously. If China bogs India down along the land frontier, it will create no space for itself to open a maritime front against India. That will complete India's strategic encirclement. We have to prevent that.
Thank you very much for joining me, Professor Nelapat, Professor Chelani. A huge honor and privilege for me to conduct a show with some of the brightest minds in India. Ladies and gentlemen, with Professor Nelapat, Professor Chelani, we spoke about a lot of things. Weaponization of a virus, what is China doing? And we ended up by coming to the line of actual control that China will not let go. China has ominous designs against India, whether in the mountains or in the seas. Thank you for joining this very special show, Chinese Checkers, Weaponization of a Virus.